Welcome everyone to this first session on optimizing your Azure Sentinel platform. Today with Saggie Haim, our Cloud Security Solutions Architect at CyberProof, and Javier Soriano, Senior Program Manager at Microsoft. So Saggie, would you like to start off with the introduction?
Yeah, so as you said, hi everyone, my name is Saggie. I'm leading the Cloud Security Architect teams in CyberProof, responsible for onboarding our customers to CyberProof services, and I'm also in Microsoft Azure MVP.
Thanks, Saggie. Over to you, Javier.
Yes, so my name is Javier Soriano. I'm a Senior Program Manager in Microsoft, working within the Azure Sentinel customer engineering team. So basically working with customers all over the world, deploying their Azure Sentinel environments and getting the most out of the product.
Great, thank you, Javier, and welcome to our SOC Masterclass. So today we'll cover a few areas focusing on how to optimize Azure Sentinel. We have in the past, if you look at our websites, a series of webinars, we've looked at how to migrate from legacy SIEMs to cloud-native security analytics with Microsoft Azure Sentinel. But today we're assuming that this is an area that you want to invest in. So how do you justify that investment to C-level? But then how can you look to optimize that for each key stakeholder within your business that is collaborating with the SOC, particularly the security architect, head of SOC, and security analyst? We will have some time for questions, so please do submit those into the Zoom chat, and we'll coordinate that with the right speakers to try and answer those questions. And then we'll close this by showing some recommended material. Also, if there are any glitches or if you get cut out for whatever reason because of loss of signal, don't worry, these will be recorded as well. Now over to you, Saggie, to start off.
Thank you. So guys, as we all know, COVID really changed the world. While it's really impacted our physical world, it sure impacted our digital world. We've seen in the last 2 years a massive growth of public cloud and the need to enable remote working. Gartner even forecasts that a growth of 23% in overall spending on public cloud will be in 2021. And unfortunately, on the other side, we see a huge raise in attacks in the cloud, and of course, in the overall cyber crimes. Now, we can say a lot of bad things about COVID and the impact, but we can also should give him some credit. So, you know, when you're looking on the digital position of a lot of companies, we should know that COVID is the reason going forward for this thing. So I think that COVID also brought a lot of benefits and really drive a lot of the companies to digital transformation and to really modernize their solutions. So this is also the good side of the COVID. Now, moving to the cloud is not easy as it sounds. In the past, as Ben said, we spoke about the challenges that we have in the webinar that we did about cloud native. And one of the main things that the cloud changed is they took a lot of the traditional roles like the security engineer and the network engineer and the system admin and the storage admin, and they put them inside the ball and just mixed the ball. And now everyone needs to know everything. So even though when we go and we just setting up a VM, now we also need to know network, we need to know security, we need to know storage, and we need to know a lot of things. This challenge also made people to learn more and upskill their skills. So does lead to a lot of challenges and a lot of things that we see in the cloud, like exposed credentials, the challenges of managing the access and the key management in the cloud. We see a lot of misconfiguration that lead to downtimes and exposed data. We see a lot of insecure APIs going out there. And of course, the human factor that came with us from on-prem to the cloud. And one of the biggest issues that we have in the cloud is the cost optimization. So unlike in the on-prem, that we bought a server and we paid in front, now in the cloud is pay-as-use. So a lot of misconfiguration can lead to higher costs. And of course, it's another vector of attack. Now, if attacker get hold of our cloud and spend a lot of money, real lot of money, is it different from ransomware or something like this? I'm not really sure. Based on CyberProof threat intel team, those are the main threats that we saw in 2021. So of course, every week we hear about new ransomware, about a new company that got it. We see it everywhere. I think that this is one of the main things that raise to people when you talk about cybersecurity. We see a lot of exposed data due to misconfiguration and due to weak APIs. Our digital identity body is blurred. If in the past, we had our work identity and we have our own personal identity, now we all work from home. So working from home means that our PC is really mixed with our personal life. So we see a lot of the time, especially with all of our adoption and social signings, we see a lot of things that happen there and a lot of attacks. Of course, we have the supply chain attacks, and I think that we all of us heard about SolarWind and the case that they had there and how it affects a lot of the company outside. Crypto mining. So crypto coin became a huge deal and people see a great profit from it. So of course, attackers want to utilize the cloud computing and use it to mine their own crypto. So we see a lot of malicious container out there that the sole target is and purpose is to mine crypto. And of course, as COVID taught us, working from home is necessary. So we see a lot of VPN, a lot of remote access, and a lot of things that raising, and we need to protect those things. And of course, attackers are attacking those things because this is an interest to the company network. Now, going into talking about SIEM, based on Forrester, we understand that organizations still share more than 1.5 million annually on SIEM services, but those traditional SIEMs are really struggle. We understand that the rule-based and signature-based security system has failed to prevent most of the serious data breach in the last several years. That's why we now see a rise of something called security analytics platform. Those security analytics platform provide custom detection, and they will be dictate which provider will lead the pack. Vendors can now provide customization. They have MITRE attack mapping and SaaS delivery position themselves to successfully deliver improved detection and fast integration and flexible to their customer. So if before we saw that our SIEM was just one piece of the puzzle, we now see that Azure Sentinel really positions itself as a real security analytics platform inside the Microsoft XDR stack, and now provide a complete picture. So inside the Azure Sentinel, it's a SIEM. We have a SOAR that allows us to automate our response to most of the incident. We see a native integration with a lot of threat intelligence provider, and of course, it has its own threat intelligence feed. We have threat hunting solution. We have user entity behavior analysis already integrated inside our platform that help us to really understand the behavior of the environment, our user, our computer. We have an Azure Arc integration. As you may know, Microsoft is really investing in Azure Arc, which means multi-cloud. So we are no longer talking about only Azure. We are talking about AWS, GCP, and other cloud. We have on-prem monitoring. So we are extending our cloud to the on-prem. We have native integration with the Microsoft XDR. So we know that a lot of companies are really invested in Office and the collaboration tool like Teams and SharePoint. So protecting those with Microsoft tool will let you enjoy a native integration. And of course, we have interactive reports that we will see in the next. Now, it's not only important to choose, a tool that fits the organization. It should also fit the team. And it's important that the team know how to utilize the tool very good. So what we try to aim in this webinar is want to see how Sentinel can help the team drive to succeed. So we go over the role in the SIEM, and we will talk about how they can utilize Sentinel in order to really help them. So we'll start with the architects. So Azure Sentinel being a truly native SIEM, let us enjoy from a real cloud native architecture. It means that we enjoy all the latest technology. We have a scalable and a really efficient environment. Because of that, we have rapid integration and updates getting into the solution natively. It means that we don't need to install updates to our SIEM. We don't need to install updates to our OS. We get it as part of the service. Of course, moving to a truly cloud native solution, we no longer have infrastructure to manage. So we don't need to do sizing. We don't need to do OS patching. We don't need to maintain it. We don't need to pay for the infrastructure. We have a cloud native integration as being a native solution, integrating with a lot of cloud services in Azure is just natively a click of a button and you have connection and it's there. We have continuous development, so deployment, sorry. So as we all know, moving to the cloud introduce a lot of DevOps processes. So Azure Sentinel also adopt it and let us deploy a lot of the things automatically as a code. And the last thing, of course, is pay for what you use. You no longer limit to licenses fees or license limitation. It means that everything is available for you and you will pay for what you use and what is benefit for your organization. Now, as I said, Azure Sentinel allows to apply infrastructure as a code and DevOps practice in order to accelerate the deployment and the context deployment and development. Azure Sentinel automation tools support ARM template, Azure CLI, PowerShell, REST API, Terraform, and also the new Bicep language. And of course, it supports creation of most of the resources inside Azure Sentinel, like connectors, detection rules, automation rules, workbooks, which are interactive reports, playbook for automation, hunting queries, and of course, parsers and self-queries and watch list.
Saggie, I popped my camera on because I want to ask a question for you, and for the benefit of other viewers as well. Can you explain a little bit about what infrastructure as code is? You mentioned this in the first line. I think this would be quite useful for everyone. Yeah, sure.
This is a great question. So the cloud really taught us that if we look on the past, I had my VM or I had my server, and this was my old world. So I went on and I worked on my server and did everything manually and make sure that everything is okay. And every day came and check him like I check in my dog. So moving to the cloud allow us to really look on scale differently. So being able to pop up VMs or resources for a short amount of time or only when I need will introduce the ability to do things as a code. So now, if in the future I went to my system or my VM and did everything manually, with infrastructure as a code, I can now automate the entire deployment. So if now I need to scale my, my web services or my infrastructure in the end, so I just run it in the code in a click of a button, everything starts to deploy, and when I finish, I just destroy it. And of course, this is let us enjoy from always ready for the use cases. So if for some kind of reason I lose my infrastructure or for malicious activity, click of a button and everything comes back.
And of course, now this is kind of applying that concept, click of a button concept, to security for the SOC. I'm assuming to be able to click all of the different components of that infrastructure in an instant to their environment, so they don't have to go and set up everything individually.
Correct. So I want to stop my share on the slide and share my screen, and I want to show how easy it is to just go and just again. and deploy Sentinel and in automated manner. So this is my Visual Studio Code. For those who doesn't familiar with Visual Studio Code, this is an open source IDE for Microsoft. What I can show with you here is this is my environment, and I have a repo in Azure DevOps that we will see in a minute. And here I have my code. So here at CyberProof, we are using Terraform. For those who doesn't know Terraform is an infrastructure as a code solution in order to write infrastructure using code. So you can see here an example of setting up in Azure a log analytics workspace. One of the benefits of Terraform is it's really readable and easy to understand. So just reading this first line, we can guess that what I'm deploying here is in log analytics workspace. For those who don't know, Azure Sentinel is based on log analytics workspace, and this is a solution that we deploy on top of it. So the first thing that I want to do is to deploy a log analytics workspace. Then on top of this log analytics workspace, I want to deploy the security insight or the Sentinel solution on top of it. So as easy as that, I can use it. And one of the benefits of infrastructure as a code is the reusability. So if now I need to deploy one or I need to deploy 10 of them, I can just change the Terraform var and change the variables. So coming here and changing it from 01 to 02 will just deploy me a new solution, a new log analytics, and a new Sentinel with a different name. And of course, change the resource group or change whatever I want. With that, we have a lot of PowerShell scripts that we are using in order to automate the creation of the resources. So here, for example, we have a script to deploy detection rules. So we can see here the detection rule, and this is an example of creating a detection rule in a JSON format. So there is a standard and a format that you can find in order to write JSON or YAML, of course, and code your detection rule. So I can see here the severity, you can see the query itself, the query frequency, the period, and all the rest of the things. We also can automate the workbooks creation. So we can see here all the configuration of the workbooks. And lastly, we have the pipeline that will run all those code. So when I finish working on my code, I can then go to my Azure DevOps environment, and I can see here that my code is ran, and I can see that it deployed my log analytics workspace, and I can see it here. I can see that it deployed my data connector. So in this demo, we did a security center and the office. We have detection rule and workbooks. And when that's finished, I can now move on to my portal and see my resource group that the resources has been created. And I can go to my Sentinel and I see that I already have events. And I can go to data connectors and see that my data connectors is enabled in a second. And by that, we can automate the entire deployment of the Azure Sentinel. Now, if we want to make changes, we make the change on code and deploy it, and it will automatically adjust my environment. So I can see here that my Defender is enabled, and Office should also be enabled. And this is done by code. Now, if, for example, I want to take it to another environment, another customer, I can just copy paste the code, change the parameters, and deploy it. And you can see that the entire deployment of the code took really few minutes to run. So I can see that the entire configuration and deployment took 8 minutes. And that's it. Now, Javier, I spoke about the architecture and how easy it to deploy Azure Sentinel via code. So can you come and explain about how the SOC manager can really utilize this solution that we deployed?
Absolutely. Thank you, Saggie. So yeah, let's take a look at how this looks from the SOC manager perspective, right? So first of all, the SOC manager has several challenges that they have to tackle, right? First of all, how do we ensure the compliance to the SLA? How do we make sure that we're really delivering to the other teams internally what we promised? Also, we need to identify trends. Is the number of incidents that I'm seeing in the SOC going up, going down? Also, is my team big enough in order to be able to deliver what I promised? Is the team load really at a level that I can get more incidents, I can assume more incidents, or do I need to hire more people? Also, in many occasions, we need to report to the leadership. All these metrics, all these KPIs that our SOC is built on, we need to be able to show them how the SOC is performing, in order to meet those SLAs, those KPIs. And then also those two metrics, like for example, understanding the ingestion costs, right? So for example, Azure Sentinel is a platform that is mostly based on, mostly charged on ingestion. So we need to really understand if there is any variations, if there is any also anomalies. So there might be specific data sources that are ingesting more data than I expected. And I need to be able to identify that and act upon that, right? So let me show you a little bit how you can do that with Azure Sentinel. So here I'm sharing the Azure portal. This is basically one component within Sentinel that we call workbooks. It's basically a dashboard, but it has more features. It's more dynamic, and I'll show you why. So in this case, we're showing a workbook that is called Security Operations Efficiency. So this one specifically is showing me in this specific visualization the number of incidents that I'm seeing over time, right? You hear several dates and how the number of incidents is going up and down depending on the day. Also, I see those incidents classified by the closing reason, right? So in some cases, it might be a true positive, a false positive, true positive. So in these cases, I have this breakdown here in this donut chart that shows me what is that breakdown. Also, I can see the incidents created by severity, by owner, who is the owner that is really handling more cases, by status. Also, I can see the mean time to triage. So how long is taking my team to triage a specific incident and how long is taking for them to close a specific incident. Not only that, but as I was telling you, this is dynamic. I can, for example, in this case, use this specific timeline view to only focus on a specific portion of the time. And this will actually reflect or refresh the other visualizations to just visualize what I'm selecting over here, right? I have many other views, like all these different metrics shown over time, as you can see here. Also, yeah, the mean time to closure per owner. I can see the different members of my analytics team, how long it's taking for each of them to close the tickets, and so on and so forth. As you can see, a wealth of information that I can easily consume. Not only that, but if my manager needs to see that, I can easily just export this report to show it to them, to send it weekly, for example, so they can oversee the overall status of the SOC. So Saggie, what do you think about this report? Do you see customers using them?
Yeah, so I think that I personally really like this this report because I come in from a background of monitoring, not only security, and I really believe that if every incident should be a true positive, because when you have a lot of false positive, then you start to lose the confidence in the system, and when you lose the confidence in the system, your investment go away. So using this and see all those false positive and letting the team really spend the time there really help, and this directly affecting the efficiency of the people, because then you see less time to respond, and you see how they close a lot of incidents. You see a reduce of escalation of incidents from L1 to L2. So this is really good.
Cool, perfect. So let me show you the second one. This is another workbook that we have within Azure Sentinel that is helping the SOC manager to identify any anomalies and any ingestion costs that are going outside of the normal, right? So in this first table that we see in this report, we see all the different data types that we're ingesting. For example, some logs from AWS CloudTrails, some logs from Azure Diagnostics that are coming from Azure PaaS services, some logs from SYSLOG, security events from Windows, et cetera, right? So I can see at a glance which are the data types that are really taking the most out of my bill, my Azure bill. So I can identify any outliers that I might want to take a look at. Also, I can see the trend over time, not only for the overall set of data types, but also by data type. As you can see here, we have this stack chart that's showing me for each specific day in the calendar year, how much of each of the different data types I'm ingesting, right? So I can easily identify those trends. Also, I have here an EPS calculator, right? That is telling me for each of those data types, what is the highest, lowest EPS that I'm seeing, and many other statistics, right? So some of the things that we have in this one, in this report, is the data collection anomalies. So if that previous view is not enough, I have also here another one that is showing me using advanced analytics on my data on the workspace that Saggie was mentioning before. I can actually pinpoint what data sources are seeing more or less data than we anticipated and we saw before, right? In this case, for example, we saw in the last few days that we were seeing this number of gigabytes per day coming into the workspace, but now we're seeing less, right? So it's telling me that there's an anomaly score of -0.43. So in that case, I might want to take a look, closer look at that data source and see why it is bringing less events than normal. And not only that, but I can actually tackle that by data type. So have a more closer look at the data by data type. Also, we can see that information broken down by agent. So in different collectors within Azure Sentinel, I can see how they are performing. In this case, for example, I have several collectors deployed around the world in different OSs, in different operating systems, and I can see if there is any problems with the heartbeat. In this case, for example, I see that one of my systems right now is unhealthy, so I should be taking action upon this specific data collector. Again, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, I'm as you know, I'm an architect, and I think that what I'm seeing from this is how I can optimize the cost. So for me, and working with the customer and see what are the noisy, let's call it data source, and see what is the value and where we can optimize the cost. And Javier, if we are talking about cost, so what are the ways that we can really optimize the cost of Sentinel?
Glad you asked me. So there's two main places where the SOC manager and the architect together can really tackle those cost optimizations. The first one is ingestion. So basically filter what gets into Sentinel, what gets into the SIEM. And the second one is retention. So how long do I keep the data in Sentinel? And if there's any other platforms that I can move the data to keep them for long term, right? So let's look at the first one, at ingestion. So for the ingestion one, we recommend filtering at the source. So before the data leaves the data source itself, we want to make sure that that it only sends to Sentinel what we really need. We have several options to do this. First of all, what we call the Azure Monitor Agent. This is a new agent that we released last year, and that is now in general availability, so available to everyone, that allows us to do much more granular filtering, and we'll talk about that in a second. We also have two more options, SYSLOG daemon filtering and LOGSTASH filtering. So those also happen at the source, and we'll explain a little bit about them. And at the end, if those other options are not available, we can always do custom coding. There's easier options to do this. You don't have to be a super programmer in order to do this part. We have tools that allow you to do some visualization programming as well. So Azure Monitor Agent, a very important new addition to the family of agents at Microsoft. So it allows us to monitor those Azure VMs, but also on-premise VMs, as long as they are onboarded into Azure Arc. Azure Arc, if you don't know, is the management plane extension in order to also be able to onboard machines that are coming from your on-prem or other clouds. So at the end, what this does, this new agent, is give us the ability to filter based on XPath queries. This XPath queries is basically the ability to tell the agent what specifically they need to connect. For example, in this case, we're asking the agent to just collect event ID from Windows 4648. Okay, so the agent will push the configuration into the server, and it will only report to the workspace this specific event ID. So at the end, this specific component, the expat queries, we put them in a new object that we call data collection rules. So those data collection rules that you see here in blue on the right basically specify what needs to be collected. And the beauty of this is that I can have an environment like this. I have my line of business application server and my SQL server. And there's a specific things that I would apply to just one of them or to two of them. So for example, the SQL data collection rule that collects a specific logs from the SQL engine, right? So that one I will only apply to my SQL server. And then, for example, there might be a central IT default that collects, for example, the security events that we were talking about that I apply to both my line of business application and also my SQL server. So again, very important tool in order to optimize and filter to just send to Sentinel what you really need. Then we have these two other options that we mentioned, syslog daemon filtering and LOGSTASH. So the common use cases for this approach are, for example, masking of PII data, reduce the noise by removing fields that we don't really need. And of course, as we have been mentioning, control and reduce the cost and ingesting only what matters, right? Important point that I mentioned here in the slide is that the syslog option, the one that where we filter at the syslog daemon, will be ingesting into a table that, as we call native table, which is called syslog itself. And that allows us to take advantage of all the different Sentinel features. Whereas with LOGSTASH, we will ingest into custom tables. This is basically the first row that you see in this comparison table. LOGSTASH on one side is supported by a big community. It has a huge library of plugins for many third-party platforms that you can integrate with. But on the other side, syslog is less complex to maintain, right? For LOGSTASH, we have a built-in log analytics data connector. Basically, so it's supported by Microsoft, it's built by Microsoft and supported by Microsoft. So you can trust with no doubt that implementation. You can implement LOGSTASH and use that plugin in your environment. And syslog daemon, you can do it together with the AMA agent that we talked about in the previous slide. And the last one is the custom code that we mentioned, right? So if those options that we mentioned are not available for whatever reason, I can always do a custom code development. It can be using LOGSTASH, which requires very low level coding expertise. It can be using logic apps. Logic apps, in case you don't know, is basically a way of doing serverless programming just with blocks, right? So as you can see here in the screen is this example. This is a program that runs every day, gets some information from a specific API, and then parses that information and sends that information to a log analytics workspace, right? So that's very easy to do and manage without having to be a super expert coder. And at the end, also, we have the serverless options with Azure Functions or in other clouds like AWS Lambda or others. I can still use those functions as well in order to bring data into Sentinel.
Javier,
yes.
Just wanted to bring your attention to one question that we got from a viewer, particularly around this area. One viewer was asking, is there a recommended period of keeping data? I guess it's down to each organization to define this. Is that correct?
It's correct. So we're going to be talking actually about retention a little bit more now in the next few slides. So maybe we can answer that in a few slides. But yeah, as you were saying, there's no specific time frame that is recommended for everyone. Each organization can have their own needs. What do we typically see? Around 20, 180 days, depending on the organization. So some go higher, some go lower. And then, of course, there might be other reasons to keep the data for longer, like, for example, regulatory compliance reasons, any audit requirements that the company has that in many cases forces the organization to keep the data for longer. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, good question. So anyways, yeah, let's talk about retention cost in particular in depth, right? If you have a big deployment, a big ingestion number for Azure Sentinel and Log Analytics, the retention cost that is associated with that can be high, right? So we have to look at solutions that really bring that cost down. So there's one specific feature that is called Log Analytics Data Export. This feature basically streams the data as it is ingested into the workspace. It streams it to either a storage account or an event hub. What we can do is, in order to keep that data live, so we can query it, we can integrate with another service in Azure, which is called Azure Data Explorer, right? So for example, in this architecture that we put in the screen, we see that we keep the data in Sentinel for a number of months, X months retention, and then the data is sent in real time is sent into the Event Hub and then is ingested into Data Explorer. We have other architectures. I'm not going to go into the details of all the other architectures. We have these different architectures for reference in our documentation, so you can go and ask. And Saggie and the team are super expert on all these things. So yeah, there's different options depending on your specific needs. Here we have a table that tries to summarize a little bit all those different options. So Saggie, from your experience, what do you think is the one that customers go for in the majority of the times? And also connecting to the question that the audience asked, do you see a specific number of days or months that the customers normally keep the data into the SIEM?
Yeah, so yeah, this is a really good question. And I think that one of the key discussion that we have with customers. So as you said, it depends on the size of the deployment and the amount of data that you have, because if you have a very low amount of data, there is really no sense system, of course, to go to Azure Data Explorer because of the additional cost that you have. So storing it to a storage cloud is the preferred way. And of course, it's the cheapest way. But as you know, it's a little bit more complicated to use it. But what we love in CyberProof is the Azure Data Explorer. And the reason is because the same amount of money that you pay for the retention of the data and the use of it, you get a lot more. And of course, because of the native integration between Sentinel and Azure Data Explorer, that you can run hunting query from Sentinel directly on the ADX, or you can query the data directly from Sentinel and the ADX, or the other way around. So we really like it. And for your question, so I think that in order to really optimize the cost, as you know, with Azure Sentinel, you get 90 days free of retention. So most of the customers keep the data for 90 days on the Sentinel because this is enough time to query the things that are happening right now. But after 90 days, the data sits in Azure Data Explorer. And the main key and the main benefit is that Azure Data Explorer and Azure Sentinel both use the COSTS-2 query language. So yeah, when an analyst master the Sentinel and now need to use the Azure Data Explorer, for him it's transparent and use the same thing and the same language and skills that he has. This, for example, why we in CyberProof develop a tool that's called AZDX. So
let me move there. Yeah.
Yeah. So we build the tool that in order to automate the configuration of Azure Data Explorer, especially for those things. So as Javier said, we can export the data from log analytics to Azure Data Explorer using Terraform and ARM and rest of the tools. You can do a lot of the automation, but you can't really automate the configuration itself. So this is why we build this tool, and you can find it under in GitHub under CyberProof AZDX. And Javier, if you can move to the next slide.
Sure.
So what I want to show now really quick, because of the time, is how we take a use case that really simulate a real customer, and how we can automate it really, really quick. So I will share my screen now for a second. So you all remember this Visual Studio Code that I showed. What I want to do now is to move to another branch that I created, and you can see here now that this will get full, and you will see now that a lot of resources will be added to the code. So if we go now and look on the Terraform, now we have more services, and we have the service ADX, we have the Event Hub, and the log analytics to ADX export. So the Sentinel stayed without the change. So now using Terraform, we can automate the environment, and using AZDX, we can then go on and automate the configuration of the ADX. So in order for export the data, the Azure Data Explorer need two things. You need a table, and you need a mapping schema. So the mapping schema will tell the Azure Data Explorer how to map the fields that come in from log analytics to the fields that we have inside Azure Data Explorer. So we can see here the scripts. and all the configuration and everything there. And if I now move to the portal again, and I will do now a refresh, we'll see that after the pipeline ran, we can see all the resources. Now, one of the benefits of using infrastructure as a code and the way that we use it in CyberProof, you can see here that we have different stages. So the idea behind it is to give the flexibility of the team to work together. So I can, when I want to do a deployment, I can choose which step I want to run. So if I make change to one of them, I only affecting the one component that I'm doing. So you can see here that we always run the things that fail. So we saw we have a fail here. We failed once, then we made a fix and then run only those steps. So it's really, really fast. And if I go now back to the portal, we can see here inside the log analytics, we can see that we have the rule name, log analytics to ADX, to the event tab. And we can see also the Azure Data Explorer, and we can see all the configuration already here in place. Okay. I don't think that we will see data right now because it's take a little bit of time. But as you can see, I use KQL again, yeah, and we can see data. And the data now that come from the log analytics is it here. And as you can see, it's unparsed. And this is one of the downside of using ADX, and is that we need to parse. So we have a little bit more maintenance and more things to do. So Javier, you know, we did everything as a code, we automated things, we know how the SOC manager can utilize and really enhance it. Now let's get to the interesting stuff, how a security analyst is going to enjoy this system.
Perfect. Let me share back my screen. You should see it now. Cool. So yeah, let's take a look at what different features do we have for the security analyst to really get the most out of Sentinel and, you know, make their life easier when it comes to triaging and closing those security incidents. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about is the threat hunting experience, right? So we have worked in a new revamped experience for the analyst to do threat hunting. I'll show you in a second a little bit of a demo. I think we have a little bit of time for that. Basically, what it does is it organizes different hunting queries in order to facilitate easier hunting and classifies that by MITRE attack tactic and technique. So it tells you exactly how many hunting queries do I have to hunt for specific behaviors in each of the different tactics and techniques, right? So very important. Also, we see we have one feature that is called data results. So this allows me to say, okay, when I run the query, I want to see what is the trend, right? So did I see more results than the last time that I executed this query? Do I see less results? Is there a trend in here that I should be worrying about? So this is also very important. Also, we allow for evidence bookmarking. So imagine that you are an analyst and you are doing some threat hunting and you find something suspicious that might be related or not to an existing incident, right? So in that case, I want to be able to say, hey, I found this specific evidence. I want to bookmark that evidence and I want to attach it to existing incident or create a new incident in that case. And also one thing that we have in the threat hunting dashboard is real-time monitoring. So we have one thing called live stream, which basically allows you to say, hey, I have this query that is hunting for a specific behavior. I want to leave it running for a while live, and then being able to capture if there is anything that matches that query in real time. So let me show real quick that for a couple of minutes. Here you have the Sentinel portal. So this is the Azure Sentinel UI with all this menu on the left. And within that, within a specific section, within the threat management section, we have the hunting dashboard, as you can see. So this hunting dashboard, we see all the different MITRE tactics in here at the top, right? You see that we have reconnaissance, resource development, initial access, execution, persistence, and so on and so forth. So I can say, hey, just show me the specific tactics or the specific rules or hunting queries that really match this one specifically, in this case, defensive evasion, right? So in that case, I filter automatically by those tactics and it's showing me which ones adjust to that definition, right? I, for example, can select several of them and then run those queries, and they will automatically start loading and start executing in the background in my workspace live, and then return the results whenever they're ready. When they're ready, I will also have, as I was saying, the delta results, the results, the techniques, the meta techniques that apply to those. And if there's any delta, in this case, these specific hunting queries didn't return any result because there's no activity for this specific log type. But this allows me to really have that overall view. We also have the bookmarks, as I said. So in here, you can add a bookmark for some specific, as I said, evidence that you have found, and then attach that into an incident or investigate separately. Okay, so I can say, for example, this specific evidence that I found, add to an existing incident, and I will be able to just click on that and be able to select the incident that will be attached to this evidence. Or I can create just a new incident. That's completely up to you. And in that case, I can map to a specific person, assign to a specific analyst to take care of this incident, etc., etc. And the last one that I mentioned is the live stream. So again, I can have a specific query that I want to run, and then select that to be running in live stream. I can just click play, and this will start executing in real time and show me any specific results that I obtain from that query. Okay. Let me go back to the presentation.
And Javier, this is also,
yes.
You can query data directly on ADX from here, right?
Exactly. Yeah, good point. So one thing that we can do is create my own hunting query that is pointing to data that is sitting in my Azure Data Explorer cluster. This is something that we support within this specific feature in Sentinel. Yes, the same for workbooks, by the way. Those workbooks that we were seeing here before that I was showing you, those workbooks also support to query data that is not only in Sentinel, but also data that is sitting in ADX, in Azure Data Explorer, for sure. Okay, and let me move to the last section, which is how do we empower the security analyst to enrich existing incidents, right? So there's many different ways. So one of the things that we believe strongly in is automation. And one way to deliver that automation is through what we call playbooks. Those playbooks can do many different things. They can just send you an email whenever there's an incident. They can, integrate with an ITSM tool like ServiceNow, for example. They can just, you can execute that playbook to just synchronize automatically without human intervention to synchronize with your ITSM tool. Or they can be used for enrichment, which is the thing that we have now at hand, right? Imagine that, for example, you want to bring some information from VirusTotal, right? So you can have a playbook that grabs the IP addresses or the file hashes or any other entities in the incident, and then queries VirusTotal to check if that specific entity is a match in the VirusTotal database, right? And if there is a match, I want to have that information in the incident, right? So the analyst is able to decide if this incident really requires a closer look or is something that we can close as benign, right? We have, by the way, many different playbooks in our gallery that can do many different things, like bring data from Azure Active Directory, from Defender for Endpoint, and not only for first party, as I was saying, for ServiceNow. It can integrate also with Slack, with Teams, and many other integrations. We also have watch lists. So watch lists allows us to do several things. For example, whitelisting, blacklisting, but also as we are talking here, enrichment, right? So I can, for example, bring a list of IP addresses that are common in my company that I shouldn't worry about. I can also bring like specific countries that I know that are benign in my company where I have locations, so I shouldn't be worrying from traffic coming from that country, and many other use cases. And by the way, we also bring or have our own out-of-the-box watch list that you can use, like VIP users, high-value assets in your company that we use within our analytic rules. We have also UEBA, the User Entity Behavior Analytics, which between UEBA and our machine learning anomalies, they basically identify anything that goes outside of the baseline of the regular of a regular entity that is working in our environment, right? And of course, we have deep threat intelligence integration. We have integration not only with the most common commercial platforms like MyMeld or Threat Connect, but also we have a connection to any taxi server. And of course, not only that, but we also include those IOCs that come from threat intelligence into all our analytic rules and hunting queries and so on and so forth. So what do you think about these two things, the enrichment options and then the threat hunting as well, Saggie?
So those are a really great solution, and I really like the UEVA engine and the way that it's how it's look on the entity itself is group and organization, and it really show the real picture and really help understand and reduce the amount of events that we get. So, and of course, the threat intelligence is really good feature, and we are able to connect our side of threat intel team feeds and everything to Sentinel. So this is great, and we really like those features.
Awesome. Perfect.
So we do have, just before we move into this, we do have a few minutes left. So I want to actually run a poll. We did get a good suggestion from one viewer. They wanted to find out how others were using Azure Sentinel. So I'd like to ask our background staff technical staff to start the poll, please. That should come up soon, and answer some questions on which the Sentinel use case, or firstly we'll start with the poll on which stage you're out of deployment. So here it should be coming up on your screen now. Is your company planning to adopt Sentinel SIEM? So is it already deployed, planning to deploy in the next 6 months, currently assessing cloud SIEMs, or no plans? So we'll give you 30 seconds or so to answer that question. I think this will be good information for everyone on this call as well, to get a sense of where everyone is in their journey. And then we'll show the results. So let's give another 10 seconds or so. Where are you at your stage of deploying or adopting Azure Sentinel? Okay. Let's have a look at the results. So no plans to change the SIEM at the moment. We've got 33% already deployed. Great to see. 18% planning to deploy in the next 6 months. So really, this is a good opportunity for those who have already deployed Azure Sentinel to take a look at the recorded version of this webinar, this session from the SOC Masterclass series. Have a look at some of the key points that were made. For those who aren't planning to change the SIEM but looking to join with their on-prem SIEM, or looking to monitor both on-prem and cloud environments, Azure Sentinel is obviously a good way of doing that. Let's bring up our next poll now, which will focus on the use cases. So for those who are deploying or planning to deploy, or have already deployed Azure Sentinel, what capabilities are being planned? What are the key priorities that you're looking to onboard onto Azure Sentinel? Is it mainly for monitoring cloud data? Are you wanting to take advantage of the threat hunting query capabilities, the workbooks, the dynamic workbooks that Javier went through, the automated playbooks through logic apps, enables that faster response? Are you looking to monitor hybrid cloud environments, perhaps looking to ingest AWS or Google? Or are you looking for that broader on-prem and cloud monitoring visibility as you're transitioning from on-prem to cloud native security operations? So maybe give another 10 seconds or so, give everyone a chance to answer. And here we go. Automated playbooks. Interesting. Javier, does that, or Saggie, does that surprise you?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, automation is probably the #1 priority for many SOCs, right? The number of incidents is ever growing. and we need to tackle them as quickly as possible using intelligence to be able to decide what is better for that specific incident. So yeah, for sure is something that we see around.
It's also one of the big main requests from the CDC also, introducing more and more automations.
Yeah. Great. Well, that's all we have time for, really. There were a couple more questions. I'll post one of these questions on the chat in case Javier or Saggie, you want to answer this in the chat. Just a question around using Azure Monitor Agent. There is some material online that you can look up as well on our website. Just go to cyberproof.com, go to resources, and you'll find on the white papers section, the ebook. You'll also find some webinars on the topic, and definitely recommend the blog that Saggie wrote on cutting Azure Sentinel costs, all around how to cut those log ingestion and retention costs by using ADX. All is left to say thank you, Javier. Thank you, Saggie, for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.